It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome in to one of my favorite editions of Rico Brogna, episode number 584. One of the fun things about the offseason is our favorite president, David Stearns, will meet the media at times during the winter meetings, or in this case, the GM meetings. And what we like to do on the Rico Brogna is listen to everything he said, and after each answer, react to it. So if you didn't get a chance to hear David Stearns meet the media on Tuesday afternoon at the general manager meetings, the Rico Brogna is a one-stop shop. You'll hear everything he said, and you will hear our reaction to everything he said. I do admit that listening to David Stearns now, off of a season in which the Mets collapsed, not as fun as listening to him a year ago. A year ago, there was a trust. A year ago, there was a, hey, even when I don't agree with you, I trust you. But obviously, the 2025 season didn't go very well. And so while there's still maybe some trust for David Stearns, it's not the same as it was a year ago. Before we get started, one thing I do want to address, because I got a lot of emails about this. I want to correct a mistake I made in the free agent deep dive when talking about Cody Ponce, the free agent who had a big year last year overseas. I incorrectly referred to his success in the Japanese Baseball League. It was not. It was the KBO, the Korean Baseball Organization, which is quite a step down. So there were many corrections. I appreciate the emails. Scott, Brett, Michael, Jerry, Chris, Juan, Edward. Yeah, a lot of people wanted to point it out, and I do appreciate that. Just so for a clarification, Cody Ponce, who we talked about in the free agent deep dive, his breakout year last year, KBO, not the Japanese Baseball League. If you didn't listen to that, Rico Brogna, check it out. We talked about all of the starting pitching free agents. We will have an episode coming up in a couple of days in which we focus on the position player free agents. But for this episode, it is all about David Stearns. The general manager meetings are taking place in Las Vegas, Nevada. The reality is usually things don't happen at the GM meetings in terms of players signing or players being traded. What we always hear about the GM meetings is it lays the groundwork. So GMs speak to each other, maybe ideas are floated, and trades that are made down the road may have originated at the general manager meeting. So do not expect there to be a big amount of breaking news over the next few days in Las Vegas and Nevada. But we did get to hear from David Stearns during day one of the general manager meetings. So let's kick it off with clip number one of David Stearns.
Can you tell us about Kai Correa and Jeff Albert?
Yeah, so Jeff, obviously a very familiar face to our organization, has done a great job impacting our hitters at the development landscape, has a great deal of familiarity with a number of the players who are at the major league level, and was really a natural fit for us. He's very familiar with Troy as well, and Troy comes extremely well recommended. A guy we were very excited to be able to access, bring into the organization. And Kai comes to us as really one of the best defensive coaching minds in the game. Someone who has established a reputation from people he's worked with, players he's coached repeatedly as innovative, who can really move teams and organizations forward on that side of the ball. And so we're ecstatic to be able to add all of those guys to our staff.
Troy was Troy Snitker, the son of Brian Snitker, the former Astros hitting coach who's joined Jeff Albert underneath Jeff Albert as the hitting coach. And you heard Kai Correa. The most appealing part about Kai Correa is his reputation for defense. And as David Stearns mentioned at the season-ending press conference, defense is certainly going to be a priority.
David, when you say best defensive minds, can you elaborate a little on what that means? We see whoever the infield coach is hitting ground balls with guys, working with guys in the afternoon. What makes Kai at that level where he's so desired? What does he do?
Yeah, so I think coaches can impact players in a number of different ways. At a base level, it's what drills are we asking players to do? How are we catering some of our instruction to individual player needs? How we're working with players on a daily basis. And then, yes, some of the in-game strategy elements that coaches are working on day in and day out with some members of our front office. And then it's the coach's job and responsibility to execute and make those real in-game decisions about some of our defensive strategies. And so Kai has distinguished himself in all those areas throughout his career, and we think he's really going to help our organization.
Well, let's see. The defense wasn't great in 2025. As you mentioned, David Stearns has made it a priority on run prevention. A big part of run prevention is improving this defense. Some of the things he described, obviously, we don't get to see. The drills that are done before games, the things that will improve these guys defensively. Obviously, there'll be some new players on this team, but some of the guys that are here need to be a little bit better defensively. And you hear Kai Correa as maybe a guy who can certainly change that.
Do you have a pitching coach yet?
Not ready to comment on a pitching coach.
He's not ready to comment on a pitching coach. We've heard rumors about where they may be going. Justin Willard, the former Boston Red Sox director of pitching, has been reported as the guy that they are, I guess, apparently closing in on as pitching coach. They probably are. Maybe they're detailing some contract stuff so he can't announce it. So that'll just remain a rumor for now.
What's your commitment to bringing back Pete and Edwin Diaz?
Look, we love both Pete and Edwin. They've been great representatives of the organization. We'd love to have them both back. At this stage of the offseason, it's really tough to predict any outcomes, but certainly we'd love to have both those guys back.
Now, this is where we want to be the psychologist. We want to hear this answer and say, okay, what does that mean? And truthfully, at least from this answer, you get nothing. They'd like to have them back. It's the middle of November. We have no idea what the ask is going to look like, or I guess we have an idea what the ask is going to look like. We don't know what the market's going to look like. So it's very tough to decipher David Stearns' true emotions from that answer, because that just seemed like a genuine, yeah, they're really good. We'd like to have them back. But let's listen to more, because David Stearns speaks for a while, and I'm sure there'll be other things he says that maybe we can pick up on. So keep going, David.
From the outside, it seems you had a strategy last year on how you dealt with Pete, which was, is there going to be a market there and then you'll react to it maybe at the end? Why would anything change?
Well, look, I think we always have strategies as we go into off seasons with how we're going to progress. And some of that is reading how different segments of player markets evolve. And that is a fairly healthy strategy to pursue. And so we'll continue to read how different segments of the player markets evolve. We understand that both Pete and Edwin were integral parts of our team, and we're certainly interested in bringing them back.
Here's what's, I think, a little complicated, in my opinion, about waiting for the market to develop for Pete Alonso. Obviously, we saw what happened last year. The market never developed, and the Mets didn't re-sign him until the very, very end. With Edwin Diaz, it's pretty simple. Like, there's a closer's market, and we went through it. We had a Rico Brogna called replacing Edwin Diaz, and you know some of the names, guys like Robert Suarez and Kenley Jansen and Devin Williams, guys that are closers. And so that market will develop together. You know, Edwin Diaz is probably going to set the tone for that market with him being the best closer out there. To me, replacing Pete Alonso, if that's what the Mets end up doing, doesn't have to come out of the first base market. It doesn't have to come out of the DH market. It could come out of the third base market. You know what I mean? Like, it's replacing the production more than it is replacing the first baseman. And so what I wonder about is, as the Mets wait on the Pete Alonso market, you can't have other guys coming off the board. That would be concerning. You know, last year when they brought in Juan Soto, who clearly set the tone for the market, the Mets were in a better position to wait on Pete Alonso. If they had lost Pete Alonso, they were able to tell their fans and even look at their own lineup, at least on paper, didn't work out this way, as saying, hey, we got Juan Soto. Look at what we added to this lineup. If the third base market starts to move, if the Kyle Schwarber market starts to move, and the Pete Alonso first base market remains slow, it puts the Mets in a tricky spot where guys could come off the board who could be that replacement for Pete Alonso, even if they're not first baseman or literally directly in that same market. So I think that's a part of what makes this whole thing very interesting. The Mets are not in a position to wait the way they did last year, because if they lose Pete, as we've talked about, and certainly in my opinion, they're going to have to replace this offense. I don't think they can just say, yeah, we'll be fine. We've got internal options. I don't really think they're able to do that. Anyhow, let's hear more from David Stearns.
Do you need to know with Pete early in the process, Dave, as far as how it might affect some other things you want to do between finding somebody else at first base or other things?
Look, I think you'd always love clarity early in the process. Sometimes that's not realistic. And off seasons are really long, and it can be tough at times in November when we're all really excited to get going and standing here at the GM meetings, wherever the GM meetings happen to be that particular year. But a lot of signings occur in January, February, and March. And off seasons now go into spring training. And we have to recognize that, be patient, and let the off season play out.
No, and I think we all understand that. I just think, and I guess this is what's so challenging, like we're going to do that, Rico, in a few days where we go through the position player market. And when we sit here in early November and we go through, ooh, I like this guy, or ooh, I like that guy, or ooh, that's a good backup plan for Pete, or I don't really like that. Guys are moving at different paces. It's not as if they're all there. It's a menu item. It's a fantasy draft. And it's, I'll take this guy. I'll take that guy. Because of the way the offseason moves, it makes it very challenging. I could sit here right now, and I know we all are forming different opinions on the best, whether you want to call it a backup plan for Pete Alonso, or for some, your preference over Pete Alonso. To some, it may be Alex Bregman. We'll use him as an example. Like, hey, improve your defense at third base. Maybe you move Brett Beatty to second base or first base. He's a grinder. He puts bat on ball. He's clutch. He changes the dynamic of the clubhouse. Whatever reason you want to come up with, Bregman's your guy. Well, Bregman may be off the market in early December. And while you're sitting there waiting on Pete Alonso just to see what the market turns into, you may lose out on your best second option. Obviously, if a guy is your priority, then he's your priority. Like if David Stearns is secretly sitting there saying, I'd prefer Alex Bregman over Pete Alonso. I prefer to throw that allotment of money at Bregman. It makes us better defensively. It changes the locker room, all those things that you could bring up, then prioritize him. Then go sign him when that market develops. But what's tough is that market may develop quicker than Pete's market, and that player may be your backup, your number one backup for Pete Alonso. So it's a part of what makes the offseason so challenging. You don't get this in the other sports. The elite level players all kind of come off at the same time. And so much like they say timing is everything in life, timing is a lot in the MLB offseason.
How much does Pete's defense affect how you view his value?
I'm sorry?
How much does Pete's defense affect how you view his value?
Look, I think all parts of player contribution inform how we view the player. For a position player, that certainly is going to include offense and what they do in the box and also what they do defensively. It also includes what they mean to us off the field, what they mean to us in the clubhouse, what they mean to us in the community. All of that gets factored in with every player, and Pete's no different.
That's a lot of things he threw out there. A lot of things. What he means to the fans, what he means to the community, what he means to the locker room. Those are the things where I'm not sure how high David Stearns and Steve Cohen are going to value that. The defense, we've talked a lot about this here during the offseason. I think, and I don't know if they have to have this discussion with Pete. I don't think they do. I think they just have to make him an offer. And hopefully the Mets offer is close enough to being the best one and he comes back. I don't think they have to have a discussion on, hey, we're going to DH you 50 times this year, or we're going to DH you 90 times next year. I don't think you have to. But I think that living in a world that we now live in, that I have grown accustomed to, where there is a DH, and the Mets have not really had a lot of good DHs since it came to the National League in 2022, you can mitigate Pete Alonso's defensive issues by DHing him more. It's not that complicated. So I like the question. I like bringing that up to David Stearns, especially because he has mentioned how run prevention is so important. But to his credit, he brought up all the other things. And those other things, what he means to the community or what he means to Met fans, you have to think that should enhance his value more to the Mets than every other team. Like any other team that signs him, you hear so much about the Boston Red Sox as a major threat for Pete. And on paper, they make a lot of sense. From a baseball standpoint, they probably should sign Pete Alonso, to be quite frank. But all that other stuff, the off-the-field stuff that should have some level of value to the Mets, should not have any value to the Boston Red Sox. All right, keep going, David. You're on fire.
Do you have enough internally to replace him if you don't retain him, or would you look to go outside for that?
I think we have internal options. We have younger players who could deserve some more opportunity. We have players we can move around positionally. And we would probably also explore what is available outside there. But I think all that's very premature. We'll see how the offseason progresses and go from there.
Yeah, this is a little different than last year. I think last year it was, especially because Soto was in the fold. So you already knew, okay, big offensive upgrade by adding Juan Soto. I think last year was simply, we'll shift Mark Vientos to first base and we'll give Brett Beatty another opportunity. I don't think it's as simple as that this year. I think Mark Vientos took such a step back a year ago that I don't think it's as simple as if we lose Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos gets a crack at first base. I think that answer from David Stearns basically says anything could happen. If we lose Pete Alonso, we're going to look at other options that are external. I doubt, and I was talking to Licata about this the other day because Sal said, hey, did you hear what Andy Martino said? And I said, no, I maybe I did. He said, one of the internal options is Vientos and McNeil platooning at first base. And I said, well, I'd hate that. I think we'd all hate that. But I'm also not worried about that because I think that, that's probably fifth down the list. I mean, it's the backup to the backup to the backup to the backup plan. I think there are many other options starting with external that the Mets would go to. I know Ryan Clifford is a guy we've heard a lot about. I don't think Ryan Clifford's ready. So I don't think it would be as simple. We're going to give him an opportunity. Now, maybe you bridge until you think a Ryan Clifford is ready. But I think Mark Vientos and Jeff McNeil, if either one of them are even still on the team come the beginning of the 2026 season, I think they're more likely to be options at first base here and there, but not to be the everyday first baseman. And so I'm not worried about that yet. I think the Mets are going to spend. I know that there was a report that came out from Forbes that the Mets lost $350 million. I got news for you. The Mets lose money every year. This isn't new. And I think that Steve Cohen is doing this, the whole spending money, trying to win thing, not because owning the Mets is like great business, but because, as he said when he bought the team, it's a trust. So when I saw that story, I know that worried a lot of people. That doesn't worry me that Steve Cohen's not going to spend money. It means more that he's going to raise ticket prices, which he's already done. I think losing money has been a part of the deal and will probably continue. So if they lose Pete Alonso, I would guess we are still looking at more likely it being external options than internal options. Keep going, David.
You talked quite a bit at your end of the year press conference. You used the term run prevention quite a bit. Can you get to that level of run prevention and Pete is your first baseman?
Okay, I think part of improving our defense in particular is having some of our players who were with us last year play better defense. That is going to be essential. I've talked to some of our players about this already. This is going to be an emphasis of ours throughout the offseason, into spring training, into the season. Sure, we would expect some new players on our team somewhere around the diamond. That's natural in an offseason. But we're going to need our current group of players to play better defense. The brand of baseball, the brand of defense that we played over the last 2 months of the season wasn't close to good enough. It has to get better.
That's interesting because I think it's easy now for us to say they got to get better defensively, go get better defensive players. And what we forget about sometimes is that guys get better. And sometimes it's because of hard work. I guess sometimes it's because of coaching. I assume that's the case. Like, we don't get to see it, but we have seen players get better defensively right before our eyes. So that was a great question. A nice, tricky question by Joel Sherman, in which he said, can you get better in preventing runs with Pete Alonso as your first baseman? And I think that answer, and it's not just Pete, But for other guys who are clearly going to be on this team next year, namely Juan Soto, that, they have to get better. And we're putting plans in place for those guys to get better. And I think that with Pete, it could be more DH time, as we talked about. And it could also be, he works his ass off, man. One thing about Pete Alonso is that we've seen him get better defensively, maybe not to the level where he is Rico Brogna or Keith Hernandez, but he's gotten better. So I like that growth mindset that David Stearns has of, we can get better defensively. It's not all just bringing in new players. It's working harder and having new strategies to improve our defense with, internally, which is going to be important because, look, at the end of the season, more than anything, the defense was awful. I mean, it was like every game there was some kind of mind-numbing play. And when you're in a pennant race, which the Mets ultimately turned out to be, they were in a pennant race. I didn't think they were going to be in one, first few months of the season. Mistakes like that cannot happen.
David, will improvement in defense include having Juan Soto DH?
I'm sorry?
Will that include having Juan Soto DH?
I think Juan's one of our players who we believe can perform better defensively than he did last year. And I think he believes that. He's going to work hard on it this offseason. He's motivated to do that. He's proven that at previous times in his career that he can perform better in right field, and we believe he will.
That answer. And I have talked about, a guy like Cody Bellinger. And, hey, one of the beauties of Cody Bellinger is play him in center field, play him in left field, play him in right field, play him at first base, have Nimmo DH, have Soto DH, have Pete DH. That answer tells me they have zero plans for Juan Soto to DH. Because the question was point blank, will you have Juan Soto DH more? And the answer was, no, he's going to work hard and he's going to get better. He's going to get better defensively. He's one of those guys who can improve. And he is partially right. Like, Soto's defense has been better in past years. And so he's still young. It's not like he's 35 years old. Can Juan have a better defensive season next year? Absolutely. I don't think he's ever going to be Roberto Clemente, but he can be better. But I think that answer was clear that they are not going to DH Juan Soto. So as much as we sit here on the Rico or anywhere else talking about, hey, they should add this guy, and then Soto can DH 50 games, Juan Soto is not DHing 50 games. That answer at least tells me that. It tells me that Juan Soto is going to play right field basically every single day. Maybe there'll be 3 or 4 games where he DHs, but it won't be on any kind of consistent basis.
Pete is one of those players who can improve?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because there have been points in his career where he has, and he's also a very motivated, dedicated player.
No question about that. Juan Soto has shown he's a very motivated and dedicated player. Case in point, 2 things from last year. Number 1, the stolen bases, which I know we're all freaking out because Anton Richardson isn't around, but Juan Soto does deserve some internal credit for improving that aspect of his game. And the story that came out early in the year about him working with the pitching coach and the pitching lab to improve his throws from right field. So say what you want about Juan Soto. A lot may be said, can be said. He's a hard worker. Despite getting $700 billion basically with his new contract, he is always grinding and working. So I certainly agree with that.
David, what's just your level of appetite for allocating serious dollars to a reliever?
Sorry, appetite for
allocating serious dollars to a relief pitcher.
Allocating serious dollars to a relief pitcher. Look, I think we're always evaluating each situation on the individual situation. I try not to draw lines in the sand. Certainly, we understand the benefits and risks of investments in every segment of the player market. That's part of the work that we do. But we're never going to rule out any particular type of player or going after any particular type of player.
Yeah, we don't know David Stearns' appetite to pay a closer big money. Citing Milwaukee is not fair because it was different. He also had an ownership group that wasn't willing to dish out a lot of money. You have the best closer in baseball in Edwin Diaz. Replacing him is going to be tough. You are downgrading no matter where you go, whether it's even Robert Suarez, who's a nice pitcher. Don't get me wrong. And you could do worse than Robert Suarez, but he's not Edwin Diaz. So it's tough to know I remember sitting here a year ago and I said, if Edwin Diaz opts out, there's a good chance he's gone, because I assumed that David Stearns isn't going to want to pay him. Now, I guess where I've differed, or at least I wonder on what he's actually going to do, is Diaz, had a really good year, was very important to this team. When you think about the season that they had, we did a Rico in which we said he was the MVP of the team. And I'm sure internally, watching this team every day, David Stearns understands that, the importance of Edwin Diaz. So I think, what changed from a year ago to now is Diaz had a great year. And B, as the Mets are coming off this disappointing year in which run prevention is really important, well, wouldn't you want to bring back the guy who's the best at preventing runs in the ninth inning? So it's tough to know what his appetite truly is going to be for paying Edwin Diaz, but I can't read too much into the past to think that he won't want to pay Edwin Diaz.
How far did talks with Edwin Diaz get before he decided to exercise opt out?
I'm not going to comment on any specific contract negotiations.
Come on, David. The question is, did you guys even talk? That would be my answer. Like, was there an exchanging of ideas, or was it simply, all right, you want to opt out? Much like we do with Pete, we'll let the market dictate things.
Do you have anybody internally that you think could be a closer if Edwin isn't here, or is that a position you think you have to fill outside?
I would imagine over the course of the offseason, we're going to add to our bullpen. You never know exactly how the back end of your bullpen is going to take shape, but I would certainly imagine over the course of the offseason we're going to add to our bullpen. We have plenty of vacancies there, and I think we'll have the opportunity to improve that area.
On an earlier Rico Brogna called Replacing Edwin Diaz, we went through all of the options, including internal options. Their best internal option to replace Edwin Diaz is Clay Holmes, who's currently slated to be in the rotation. The replacement for Diaz, if they need one, and hopefully they don't, is going to be external. Like, I appreciate that question being asked, but there's no way, if I had to guess right now, any of the internal options we talked about on that episode of the Rico, or any of us can come up with now, would be the replacement. So, no, would be the answer. If Diaz is gone, it'll probably be somebody on the trade or free agent market that ultimately takes his spot.
Did you see Senga in that role? Because he's struggled. I mean, that might present its own challenges, but he's struggled as a reliever.
I think right now we view Senga as part of our rotation. He's proven at the major league level that he can have really good years, and clearly the last 2 years at times have been struggles for him. But the talent is there. The desire is certainly there to have a bounce back year, and we're going to give him every opportunity to do that.
What's, I guess, sort of interesting about Martino asking that question is early in Senga's career, I guess he made a bunch of bullpen appearances. And when he came over after the 2022 season and signed with the Mets, I remember one of the things I read about Kodai Senga is that there were teams that projected him to eventually be an arm out of the bullpen. So I don't know if Andy Martino, who asked that question, was hearkening back to that thought of, hey, what about Kodai Senga? Plus, financially, he doesn't make that much money, especially compared to other starters. So what about Senga as an internal option? My gut feeling, and it's funny because it feels like Martino almost answered his own question in asking it to David Stearns, would be for a guy who is such a creature of habit and for a guy who needed extra rest, would they ever be able to even use Kodai Senga on back-to-back days or back-to-back-to-back days? I would be very skeptical of that from what we've seen from Kodai Senga. The other thing from that answer is Stearns sounded more committed to Kodai than he did late last season when they wouldn't recall him from the minor leagues. I remain very skeptical of Senga's status with the New York Mets. I like Kodai Senga. It's not about how I personally feel about him. I understand the concerns and the worries based on how last year closed, but actions speak louder than words. And the Mets' actions at the end of last year reeks of a team that doesn't really believe in him anymore. And I think with the trade market, you're never going to say it. Brian Cashman's the one guy who I heard say it. I never forget when he came out publicly and said, yeah, we're going to trade Sonny Gray. Can't handle New York. And it was weird that he actually did that. if the Mets internally are planning on trading Kodai Senga, they would never announce it. And if anything, they would say it the way David Stearns just said it, which is, yeah, we plan on him being in our rotation. And so if another team wants Kodai Senga and there appears to be a market for him, they realize we have to give something up. So as we sit here right now, just a prediction, I kind of think Kodai Senga is going to be traded. That is certainly a gut feeling I have. But keep going, David.
Your time long-term to Rico and Juan Soto. Do you think it's wise for another position player already in their 30s, like Pete, to tie yourself where essentially almost half of your positions would be tied into a period where they can probably begin a strong decline?
I think length of contract, number of existing commitments, that's always going to be a conversation we have to have internally. And somewhere there is a tipping point there. I don't think we're necessarily there yet, but sure, somewhere there is a tipping point. I also recognize that you generally get good free agents when they're in their 30s, and to get good free agents, sometimes you have to extend them into places in their career where performance isn't always going to go up.
All right, so that doesn't make you think that they've had a tipping point in terms of giving out long-term contracts to guys in their 30s, which leaves open basically most of the free agents that are out there because they're mostly in their 30s. You know, we talked about Alex Bregman in his 30s, Kyle Schwarber in his 30s, Pete Alonso in his 30s, Cody Bellinger about to be in his 30s. So it's a non-answer, but the answer I take out of that is, while yes, eventually there's a tipping point. Eventually you don't want to have, 9 guys signed to contracts that are going into their mid-30s. We aren't at the tipping point yet. It's tough to hear a lot of the specifics on the question, so I think we're all doing it together. We're all listening very, very carefully to hear what the question was about. And that was about Brandon Nimmo and the amount of long-term contracts they have of guys into their mid-30s. Let's hear question number 17 for David Stearns.
And I don't want to put philosophy into my words, but it felt like you love the idea, like the idea of flexibility, roster-wide, being able to maneuver. But at some point, you begin to landlock yourself, don't you?
Yes, there's a tipping point there, and roster flexibility is important, and being able to evaluate your team on an annual basis to determine where the needs are, I think, is very important. I don't think we're landlocked yet, but it's something we have to be aware of. We also have to be cognizant of, we've got some really good young players coming, and we're very optimistic about what our team is going to look like going forward. We need to give young players a chance to play. And as we go through this offseason and likely future off seasons, part of the balance is going to be filling the team with players who we think make us better and keep us competing at a very high level, while also allowing space for our younger players to get to the major league level and have a legitimate shot to contribute here.
Well, I agree with that philosophy. I think the Mets have done that the last couple of years, and that's why when we talk about center field, you want to have center field covered if Carson Benj isn't ready or Jet Williams ultimately isn't ready to possibly take that job. But you also want to have your team competitive, but have an open spot for a young guy to take it. You look back at last year, Brett Beatty was forgotten about. I mean, we all just moved on from Brett Beatty. He was here. He was on the roster. But if you remember how last year ended, Vientos became a star. Beatty got hurt. He was in AAA. He was a non-factor. As the Mets were having all of that 2024 fun and 2024 success, and then opportunity knocks on the door when you least expect it. So think about how Brett Beatty re-earned that opportunity. It came from injuries. Jeff McNeil got hurt. Injuries are a part of baseball. And it came from Mark Vientos failing. Those two things completely opened up a new opportunity for Brett Beatty. And as we go into 2026, unless the Mets trade Beatty, which is certainly on the table, his value has been rehabbed. I think we have a different view of Brett Beatty by a mile than we did last year. It's one of those young players David Stearns referred to that can grow. He certainly grew. And so as we attack this offseason, and certainly as we've done it in talking about adding players, you always want to keep an eye on young players having that opportunity. But keep in mind, sometimes those young players don't make an impact. Last year, center field was open. It was Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri. And a part of that was keeping it available for Drew Gilbert or Jet Williams or Carson Bench. Not really as much Bench. I don't think he was as close to the radar in terms of being ready to help them in 2025. But look what happened. We didn't see Jet Williams. He didn't make it. Drew Gilbert never made it and was traded. So you want to balance the two because this is a win-now team. So you want to give yourself that opportunity to compete, but also, leave opportunities open for other younger players.
How do you view the third base situation right now? And was the rotation between those young players an effective way to go about that last season?
I think Brett had a really good year, took some real steps forward in his development. I think going into the offseason, he's probably someone we would pencil in for significant third base time next year. Probably premature in mid-November for me to outline exactly how playing time is going to be allocated, but Brett did a really nice job. He earned up more and more opportunity as the year went on. I think he's going to continue to get that.
Were you happy with how?
Speak of the devil. By saying it's in pencil, if we don't add a third baseman, Brett Beatty is the third baseman. But if we add Alex Bregman, or we add Okamoto, things could be different. And it could lead to Beatty getting his playing time elsewhere, whether it's at second base, whether it's potentially a move to first base. And obviously it's on the table that he's not on the team. But I think that answer tells you if we don't make a move at third base, it's Brett Beatty over Ronnie Mauricio. It's Brett Beatty over Mark Vientos. He earned that. Now, that can change, as we saw a year ago when it was Mark Vientos' job, and then he basically lost it. But based on all the playing time that we saw a year ago, Brett Beatty impressed and will at least start the year as the everyday third baseman if they don't add a third baseman.
It worked out to have those younger players sort of rotating in at third base. Do you feel like that was an effective situation for their development and for you guys, for the lineup or defense as well?
Yeah, I think Matt did a very good job of trying to find the right matchups for players, of trying to get players into the lineup when it was called for, trying to keep everyone fresh, also trying to keep everyone rested. So I was pleased with how it went.
Yeah, I wasn't pleased how it went. I mean, do we as Met fans feel pleased how that went? I mean, I'm glad young players had an opportunity, but I think it almost stunted the growth of Ronnie Mauricio. I mean, there were moments where Ronnie Mauricio, was very impressive and probably just needed to play more. So I don't know if that rotation was ideal. David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza seem to like it. I don't know how much I agree with that.
Your commitment to finding a number one type starter, is that something that is high on the agenda?
You'd always love to find a number one type starter. I don't know how many true number one starters are out there right now. I don't know how many are actually going to be traded. I don't know how many are truly available in free agency. But you'd always like to find that top of the rotation guy. Certainly makes building out the rest of the rotation, the rest of the pitching staff a lot easier. And so if one of those guys happens to be available, we'll be right there with them. I will also go back to what I've said many times, and the way to ultimately have a true ace on your staff is to develop the ace on your staff. And I think we're on our way to doing that. I think we will do that. And we're going to continue to try to supplement that in any way we can.
Here's how I would decipher that whole thing. I would decipher it as there are no number ones in free agency. There's number one, because he even said, I don't know how many number ones there are in free agency. Well, you do. You know who's a free agent. Do you think any of them are number ones? And the answer is no. I don't think any of them are number ones. And I also took, hey, if Tarek Skubal's available, we're ready to go. And I think Nolan McLean is on his way to being an ace. That's how I would interpret what David Stearns said to that question about getting a number one.
Do you anticipate the payroll being in the same spot that it was this year?
I don't think we go into an offseason with any set payroll number. Clearly, Steve is very committed to supporting our baseball team in any way possible, and as opportunities arise, he and I are in regular contact as to what might make the most sense for the team.
Yeah, so they're going to spend. How much are they going to spend? No idea. Is there a budget? Probably not. But there are comfort levels with some of the contracts they're going to hand out. So as much as we hear, oh, there's no budget, just give Edwin Diaz whatever he wants. Just give Pete Alonso whatever he wants. Unfortunately, doesn't sound like it works that way.
Please teach me and Japanese player, Murakami and Okamoto, your opinion.
I'm not going to comment on any specific free agent at this point, but certainly understand that those players are available.
So he gave us, they're available, but I won't give you a word about the Japanese players that are available. And we've covered a few of them here on the Rico. I told you in a couple of days we're going to do a position player breakdown. And so you hear a little bit more about Murakami and Okamoto, two of the position players that are available coming over from Japan.
Does Steve say anything the opposite way of that? Like, I'd like to actually lower this?
No.
How do you view the starting pitching staff right now?
I think we have numbers in the starting pitching staff. I remain very optimistic about the younger starters that we have, about the guys we have coming even behind the group that we saw get its feet wet at the major league level. We're also certainly not going to turn away from any opportunities that we think make ourselves better at the major league level. And so we'll be looking at starting pitching in both free agency and trades. Very early for me to predict how active or what discussions are actually going to take place, but we're certainly going to be involved in that market.
Yeah, what's so different about the Mets starting pitching this offseason compared to last year and the year before that and the year before that is that they have a 5-man rotation if they want. Like, they don't have all their rotation members being free agents, or even half of them being free agents, or really any of them being free agents. Like, if they wanted, they're not going to, calm down everybody, but if they wanted, they could say, yeah, we got a rotation. It's Nolan McLean, it's Sean Manaea, it's Kodai Senga, it's Clay Holmes. We're good to go. Like, we're ready, right? They have the numbers, unlike the last couple of years. But clearly, based on that answer, and obviously the results of this past year, despite having 5 guys that they could pencil into their rotation, they want to improve, which is why I believe there will be a subtraction from what they currently have. If they go into free agency and add an arm, and then they try to trade for an arm, I don't believe the 5 guys that you could pencil into the rotation are also all going to be there. So it's different because I think last year with Severino and Manaea and Quintana all being free agents, you didn't have a lot of, it was Kodai Senga. I mean, that was it. Everybody, it was Kodai Senga and David Peterson, who I just did not mention in that little brief talk about the starters that are, they could pencil in. So they've got 5 starters, but they know they need to get better. And so when you hear Stearns talk about, well, free agency in the trade market, I believe they're going to be active, but it's a different kind of active than they needed to be the last couple of years, where they needed to literally fill out a rotation. They don't have to do that right now. They've got 5 guys who you may not love, but you've got 5 guys that you could literally pencil in right now and say, those are my 5 starters.
I don't have a set number, and some of that's going to depend as to maybe the shape of what those relievers are, and whether part of it is the true lockdown guy at the back end, or whether part of it is distributing that over multiple relievers. Clearly, we need to add some and more than one. We do not have a distinct number as to how many relievers we think we need to add.
Yeah, I go back and forth on what that number needs to be. First of all, he talked about he basically alluded to if they don't bring Diaz back, they could spread that out. I don't love that. Like at the end of the day, you need someone to lock down games. And I'm a proponent of that guy not having to necessarily just pitch the 9th inning. Sometimes the biggest moment is in the 8th inning. Sometimes the biggest moment is in the 7th inning. But I would want that lockdown guy. Now, who is that besides Edwin Diaz? There's not a lot of great options. I mean, Pete Fairbanks is fine. Robert Suarez is fine. To me, they're not nearly as locked down as Edwin Diaz. But if I had to say, looking at what they currently have, like we know AJ Minter is here. We know Brooks Raley is here. So looking at the guys that we know are going to be a part of this bullpen, to me, the number is probably 3. And that's including retaining Edwin Diaz in terms of the amount of relievers that I'd feel comfortable with. Because you do leave a few spots open for the Syracuse train or the Syracuse shuttle. And, maybe a young arm contributing. Or maybe one of your starters ending up in the bullpen and being a long man. So I don't think you need to have like literally 8 lockdown relievers, as great as that would be. But my number would probably be 3.
TBD. I think it is possible to start the season. It is more likely a little bit later in April.
I don't know what that question was. I don't know if, Pete, you could hear that. Start the season with something.
Let's try it again. Hold on. Let's try it one more time.
TBD.
It's about a specific player. Is he able to start the season?
AJ Minter?
Could be a good guess. We're talking rotation here.
That's one of the issues with these press conferences. You'd love to hear every question perfectly, and sometimes you do. But in this case, it's a gaggle. They're all surrounding him in a hotel ballroom in Las Vegas, Nevada. So it's a little tricky. So I guess what we'll say is we'll punt that question because I'm really not sure. I'd love to know. And by the way, I know I'm going to get like 150 emails to ricob@gmail.com saying it was clearly blank. It was clearly blank. I don't know who the hell it was. I'm going with Minter only because he's coming off an injury. So.
And I do know that there's an Alvarez question coming up, so it's not him. So I know they're still talking about the pitchers and stuff like that, but like I do know that there's a couple things coming up. It wasn't a position play. Let's put it that way.
Adbert Alzolay, remember him? They brought him in. He's coming off Tommy John, so maybe it's Alzolay. Could be. I'm going with Alzolay or Minter, and we got TBD. That was the answer we got from David Stearns.
Can I tell you something really quick before we go back to this mess? You nailed it in the beginning where it's like this tone is going to be a little bit different than last year. We were much more excited, buying into whatever he's saying. Like I am not happy listening to him talk at all. Like I'm almost like less is more.
Well, you see, you're not being fair though, because he hasn't
been fair.
He hasn't done anything. What would there be to be mad at? We should just interpret what he says, listen to what he says. We all have opinions on what we want the Mets to do, but there's nothing to be mad at. He hasn't done. It's not like he said Pete Alonso blows. I don't want to pay him. Like he didn't say anything like that. So what would there possibly be mad at? I guess.
Well, I'd actually prefer him to be honest and say that, hey, I hate Pete Alonso. He doesn't fit my metrics, my analytics, and he's not coming back. We will find in-house people before we go get Pete Alonso. Something like that. I'd prefer some sort of listen. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all. I'm trying to answer the question as best as possible without actually answering a question.
Well, I'll give you this. Our good friend Dan, who contributes to the Rico and Evan and Tiki a lot, sent over a David Stearns translator. And so he had some translated comments of what David Stearns said. So a little bit earlier, you heard David Stearns talk about Brett Beatty, how he had a really good 2025. Translation from Dan was, he actually looked like a competent Major League Baseball player for the first time in his life. Luckily, everyone else that played his position was so bad, he kept getting chances. And on his 105th one, he might have found something. Could Kodai Senga pitch in the bullpen, which we played a little bit earlier? Dan writes, Stearns' translator, if anyone around the league is listening, I swear he's still a capable starting pitcher. Remember that one full, healthy, good year he had? He's definitely someone you should try to trade for as soon as possible. Earlier, we played the clip of him talking about Juan Soto DHing and said, nah, he'll be fine. He's going to play the field. The David Stearns translator says, this guy makes a lot of effing money, and I'm not ready to clog my DH with him while he's only 27. So his ass better learn how to field right now. In terms of the Pete Alonso, does defense factor into the evaluation? The translator writes, if you think I'm paying this guy to be my everyday first baseman after watching him throw the ball all over the place, you're on more drugs than Lenny Dykstra.
Unbelievable.
Oh, and finally, on Pete and Edwin coming back, the Stearns translator says, unless they take the biggest hometown discount of all time, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. So a little levity in the middle of our David Stearns listening session, but let's go back to the general manager meetings and hear more questions and answers from David Stearns.
Speaking of the Japanese players, so like you have the Senga, also Dodgers have success with Japanese players. So how about your attention to the Japanese player in the free agent market?
Sure. I'd say at a high level, every single year there are really good players coming over from Japan. We have to be very vigilant and involved in that market. We are, and I don't think this is a fleeting trend. I think this is going to persist and if anything, just grow in terms of the number of really talented players coming over from Japan.
And the Dodgers can't get every Japanese player. It seems like they do. It seems like that certainly has been their thing over the last couple of years, but not every single Japanese player will go to the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Who's your center fielder right now?
Who's your center fielder?
Yeah.
I think we have a couple of options. I think Tyrone Taylor has proven he can play out there at a high level defensively. Carson Bench is going to come into spring training with a chance to make our team. And we'll see where the offseason takes us beyond that.
That's a big one. So Carson Bench is being given a real opportunity to win the center field job, which makes you believe that anybody they add to play center field, if they do, they may not based on an answer like that. They may just say, as David pointed out, we've got options, including Tyrone Taylor. Hopefully Carson Bench takes the job. They're not going to clog center field, though, with an everyday player. So trading for Luis Robert Jr., something we talked about a little bit during the offseason last year and certainly at the trade deadline, doesn't seem likely. What would I do? Bringing in Harrison Bader, if it's not Cody Bellinger, we laid out the Bellinger idea, not as a replacement for Pete, but as a guy that can play a lot, whether it's letting Alonso DH or Nimmo DH or play some center field until Carson Bench is ready. But Harrison Bader does make a lot of sense because even when Bench takes the job, Bader is such a good defender that it could lead to what we said earlier, which is Nimmo DHing and Bader playing left. I don't know if they're going to feel comfortable with Benj moving all over the outfield. And that's the reason I say Bader and left. And even that day or two where Soto DHs, though it doesn't sound like they plan on that. I always loved Bader as that fourth outfielder. I know that can be an insult sometimes, but I think there's certainly a value to him. Now, he's probably going to get $12 million a year. I don't know if the Mets want to pay $12 million a year for a guy who could eventually become the fourth outfielder when Benj is the center fielder. But that's fun. That makes spring training fun. Spring training can sometimes be arduous, but this is a real chance for Carson Bench to take the center field job, which is very cool.
You said at the end of the year that this would be a time of personal assessment in terms of what you could do better. What has that assessment led to? What have you discovered about ways you want to change your philosophy or approach to the season?
Okay, I think any time you go through the type of season and certainly the ending of the season that we went through, it provides a great opportunity for reflection, evaluation, postmortems, all of that. I do think we came out of that with some very distinct and notable lessons. I think we're going to keep those distinct and notable lessons internal, but I do think it's going to help us all be better going forward and likely influence how we go through every stage of the player acquisition process, whether that's offseason, spring training, trade deadline.
We learned some distinct, notable lessons, and we're not telling you. That was the answer from David Stearns. And part of that distinct lesson that we learned was to get rid of all of our coaches because they contributed to the mess. Keep going, David.
David, how much does a bench's presence impact what you may or may not do externally at center field?
I think it's part of the larger conversation that I alluded to earlier. When you have good young players at the upper levels of the minor leagues, we have to find space for those players to play. Carson's among them. He's not the only one, but he's among them. And so as we build out our team, we have to ensure that as we go forward, there is room for our young players to get to the major leagues when they deserve to get there and have an opportunity to really contribute to our major league team.
Yeah, and that basically means we're not going to do anything in center field. We'll let Tyrone Taylor kind of be that guy until Benj is ready, or we'll add, a fourth outfielder like we talked about because we expect Benj to be ready. Now, here's the risk. Let's be honest about the risk. Despite how high they may be on Carson Benj, he was a first-round pick in 2024, and he shot up the system last year at single A in Brooklyn, at double A in Binghamton, then finally at triple A. He didn't hit at triple A. Now, that could mean nothing. He only played 25 games there, and like we said, he shot up the system a year ago. But it's possible Benj doesn't take the job in spring training. It's possible Benj does struggle in AAA again. It's possible that there's an unlucky injury like we saw with Jet Williams and Drew Gilbert over the last couple of years, and that he doesn't impact center field the way you hope. So that's the kind of the gymnastics that you do. You want to keep that position available for him, but you also can't rely on him. Last year, he played 60 games in Brooklyn. He was really good. He played 32 games in Double-A Binghamton. He was really good. He was then promoted to Syracuse, played 24 games, did not produce. 178 average, 583 OPS. So hopefully he is ready and does contribute, but you don't know for sure.
Would you put Jet in that same boat as far as maybe being in that mix for center field heading into spring training?
I think Jet in spring training, I wouldn't close the door on anything. I think we'll see where our roster stands. I wouldn't close the door on anything right now.
Well, that answer feels like a closed door. When you say we're not going to close the door on anything for Jet Williams, that leads me to believe they plan on Jet Williams beginning the year in the minor leagues. Now, could a lot change? Of course. There could be injuries at the major league level. Jet could hit 450 in spring training. But that answer, at least I read it as we're not really expecting Jet Williams to be on the major league roster on opening day. That's at least how I look at it.
What did you think of Nimmo's year defensively?
Yeah, I think Brandon had a year where he made a lot of really good plays defensively, and then there were probably some plays that he knows he can make, that he wants to make, that we didn't quite secure. I think he would tell you that he's a better defender overall than what he showed last year, and I think he's going to prove that.
What's funny about that is I was looking at his defensive metrics last year, and defensively his metrics were actually pretty good. They were not bad in left field. Watching him every day, he felt below average, I guess is the way I would look at it. But he's only getting older, and he feels like he's maybe injury prone isn't the right answer, but it feels like he's dealing with injuries a lot. He tends to play through it, so which is a major positive. So you figure that Brandon Nimmo is trending down defensively in left field, that the best isn't yet to come. And that's why I mention his name a lot as a guy that should DH, not because he's bad defensively, but because I'm looking at those injuries. I'm looking at his age, and I'm thinking it probably behooves him to just DH a little bit more.
How's Alvarez health-wise?
He's doing well. His hand is getting better. He's going to, here as we get into December, progress into sort of the normal off-season routine and should be full go at spring training.
That's good to hear. The hope is he can get through a season without injuries. Francisco Alvarez is starting to prove to be an injury-prone player. A lot of it feels like bad luck, but it follows you. Now, he showed a lot of toughness last year. He had some big moments late in the year, but it would be really nice for him to just have a year in which he doesn't deal with nagging injuries constantly.
You talked a lot about development and sustainability. How much does that affect, I guess, your appetite for the trade market in terms of just acquiring a frontline pitcher at leveraging your prospects?
Yeah, I think if a frontline pitcher, top of the rotation pitcher is available, we're going to be involved in those discussions. There are limits to what we would do, as there would be for any player. But we do have the depth and quality of farm system at this point that we can both have those players impact our major league team in a real way and potentially trade some of them to get some really near-term help if that's available.
How's your thinking with the rotation change, Dave, after what happened last year?
That is a real declaration that they will go after a big-time pitcher if available. And we're all hoping it's Tarek Skubal. It could be Hunter Green. It could be Sandy Alcantara. It could be Freddie Peralta. Maybe it's somebody we're not even thinking about. But that was, as I think of all the things he's talked about here in this GM meetings press conference, that's pretty direct. That's him saying, yeah, we got a loaded-ass system, and if a top-line starting pitcher becomes available, we are going for it. That is a clear answer from David Stearns. Keep going, David.
I know you went for a lot of depth to try to get through the season. You had a lot of injuries, a lot of issues with that stuff. Do you think more of, I don't know if marquee is the right word, or the next level pitcher to fill out the rotation with, or fundamentally, do you look at kind of building rotation differently as far as the expense you put into it and that sort of thing?
I think we are always open and have always been open to adding the top line starter, the guy who can truly stabilize the staff. We recognize there's real value to that. I think we also have to evaluate how many of those pitchers are actually available on an annual basis. When those pitchers are available, we are going to be heavily involved in the pursuit of those pitchers.
So far, and David has only run this team for a couple of years, the only starting pitcher we have really seen him aggressively go after, a big-time arm with a big-time contract, has been Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And he looks dead on right for doing it, considering the legend he's now become. But they didn't do it for Corbin Burns. They didn't do it for Max Fried. They haven't really done it for anybody else. And we went through all the starting pitchers on a recent Rico Brogna, episode 583, a starting pitching deep dive. You could argue that none of those guys deserve that kind of treatment. So David is telling you, whether we choose to believe it or not, we'll go after a big-time starter when they're available. So far, the only one he has shown that for is Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
How many do you think there are?
I don't know. We'll find out as we go through the offseason.
How many do you think there are? I don't know. We'll find out as we go through the offseason. Unless he's referring to trades because we don't know who's available, you know who the free agents are. And that exercise, to me, comes up with none of them are truly big-time free agent ace starting pitchers. Some of them are good. Some of them are reliable. Like, the biggest issue I had with the Met rotation last year wasn't about re-signing Sean Manaea. It wasn't about signing Clay Holmes. It was about not having enough reliability in the rotation. I think there is some reliability in free agency. Dylan Cease is reliable. No question about it. I think on some levels, Zach Gallen is reliable. But I don't think either one of those guys are aces. Number ones. So I guess it's the semantics, or it's how David Stearns views this, but there's a difference between reliability and ace. I don't believe there truly is. Framber Valdez, too, by the way. I don't believe any of those guys are truly aces.
I mean, philosophically, you always have been. I mean, you're not alone in this, but wary of spending too much money on pitchers of a certain age, mileage, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, based on what the Dodgers did this year, they had a lot of success with their guys. Many of them didn't pitch yet the season, but succeeded in the playoffs. Does that change when you see what the market has to be for those guys now, $30, $40 million a year for those pitchers?
So I think it's the combination of what is the market for those pitchers, who is the particular pitcher, the individual pitcher, and then obviously what are the years for the individual pitchers. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to cast a one-size-fits-all rule. I think we are always open and have always been open to pursuing players for very lengthy contracts at high AAVs who we think have the ability to really impact us and help us, and we're going to continue to do that.
I think we forget how lucky the Dodgers were. I know they spend a lot. They're a wonderful team, but they had such an injury-prone rotation, and they were fortunate that all of those injury-prone pitchers were healthy and pitching at the right time, and it worked out, and that's the main reason they won their second straight world championship.
You had a spate of pitching injuries this year. I mean, have you guys reassessed in terms of recovery? What possibly led to this happening this particular season?
So it's interesting. If you look at our injuries in our organizations, even at the major league level, we certainly are not outliers relative to the league. This was an industry. This is an industry-wide phenomenon. I have a lot of confidence in our medical staff. I think we have a very good medical staff. I think what happened to us is we had a string of injuries to pitchers who were all pitching very well, and then the replacements for when those guys got hurt, frankly, didn't pitch very well, and it really exacerbated the injury issues we had. But I don't think we have an issue with our training protocols or our workload protocols or anything like that.
No, the issue, David, was that a lot of the starters you were relying on have track records of not staying healthy. I mean, I think with all due respect, this was a you problem because like I just talked about, I liked bringing Sean Manaea back. I liked the experiment with Clay Holmes, but you didn't have enough reliability in your rotation. I mean, Kodai Senga being hurt should not be a surprise. He's not reliable, or at least he's proving he's not reliable. Sean Manaea has had a checkered career. I was good with bringing him back. I was hoping that he was going to build off of what he did the previous season, but he's had injuries. That's not new. Frankie Montas, I mean, I'm not even going to waste my time talking more about it. We don't know about his history. And so the thing I was disappointed about a year ago was just adding one more starter of reliability, whether it was trading for Luis Castillo, which never happened. The Mariners never traded him. Or it was trading for Dylan Cease, which never happened. The Padres didn't trade for him. Or signing someone in free agency who provides that reliability. That would have made the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs, if we're being honest. And so it's not the doctors. It's not your load management. I think when you rely on a lot of starters that have checkered pasts, that's what happens. And look, the Dodgers did the same thing. They just got lucky. They got lucky in October, but they were good enough to overcome all their injuries and still win 90-plus games and win the division. But when Blake Snell was hurt, I remember saying it on the fan, like, I'm not surprised. Why would you be surprised? Ohtani's barely pitched. Why is anyone surprised? Like, none of that were surprises. Tyler Glasnow missed time. Who was stunned by that? Those guys are always injury prone, but they were good enough to overcome it. And then, yes, they got lucky in October because they were all healthy at the same time. You want to add reliability to your rotation. And I don't think the Mets had enough of that last year. And we'll see if they change that this year.
What's next for Jet?
What's next for Jet?
Yeah.
Look, Jet's going to come to spring training. And as I said earlier, I'm not going to rule anything out in terms of where he's going to start. I think there's probably some growth there, some room for development. But here in November, I'm certainly not going to close any doors.
Yeah, that doesn't make me feel confident he's going to be on the major league team. When you initially say, I'm not going to close any doors, it feels like the doors are sort of being closed. So my best guess from that answer is that Jet Williams is going to begin the season at AAA. That's how I would take that. And if there are injuries, remember there were last year with Jeff McNeil getting hurt, which opened up an opportunity for Luis Angel Acuna and even Brett Beatty. That could open up an opportunity for him, but it sounds based on Stearns' answer that Jet Williams is likely to start the season at AAA, and we go from there. And maybe he's a super utility player when he finally gets called up.
See him as a guy with a lot of versatility, or would you like to maybe move him to a position where he can get more playing time?
Well, I think he is a guy who can play at a high level at all three positions up the middle, and that's extremely valuable. Where his ultimate home is going to be at the major league level is going to be partly determined by what our need is at a particular moment, and partly by sort of where his performance excels. And right now, we think he's performing really equally well at all three, which is a great place to be.
I think just looking at the roster, second base seems to be the likeliest option, but early on in his career, it could be everywhere. He could be one of those players that gets to play a lot by just moving all over the place. Here is our final question and answer from David Stearns.
Is Vientos' role kind of contingent upon what happens with some other pieces there, like Pete and other stuff?
I think Mark had a disappointing year last year. I think he's very motivated to prove that last year was the outlier, and he's much closer to the player that we saw in 24. And the one thing that's apparent is, regardless of how our roster shapes out, there is going to be opportunity. Like there through performance or injuries, there is always opportunity. There are always plate appearances. There's always playing time for players who are performing. And so what we're encouraging Mark to do is put himself in a spot where he comes to spring training ready to perform, regardless of what our offseason looks like.
Yeah, Mark is probably in the biggest flux this offseason. I think there's a decent chance he's traded. He's in some kind of package for a starting pitcher. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't see him being the opening day first baseman if they lose Pete Alonso. I think more likely than not, if he's on the team, he's that right-handed DH option, maybe in that Starling Marte role, but maybe DHing more than that, depending on how the roster shakes up. But Mark Vientos certainly goes into this offseason with a very different tone and very different situation than a year ago. So that's David Stearns from the GM meetings day one. You got to hear every answer, and we gave you our honest evaluation on everything he had to say. Your thoughts on what you heard from David Stearns, concerns, excitements, you could email us, thericob@gmail.com. We'll have a mailbag edition of the Rico in a couple of days, and we will also do a deep dive breakdown of the position players that are available in free agency. We appreciate you downloading the Rico Brogna. Make sure you subscribe it so you never miss an edition of the Rico. Great job by Pete Hoffman. That is not easy, editing all of those clips and having them ready to go. So kudos to you, Pete Hoffman. Thank you very much for listening to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.